And now that I've published my book, I want to shift focus and start sharing the stories of other badass solo female travelers because there's so many that I know in my personal circle, and so many out there in the world that are living this kind of lifestyle and showing that it's possible. So, this is the very first episode of Women Who Vagabond, and my guest is a really special woman from South Africa, Skye Mallac, so I'm gonna invite her in.
Hello,
Hello,
how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for
Okay,
inviting
I
me for
wanna.
this situation.
Sorry?
Thanks for inviting me on this.
No, thank you for joining. I'm super excited to chat with you. Do you want to introduce yourself, Skye? I was going to introduce you, but
Sorry,
no worries.
I think I've got you. I think I need to hold my phone so it will deal better with me. Sorry, what did you say?
I was asking if you'd like to introduce yourself. And
Yeah,
it's a little bit about yourself.
well, I'm Skye and I'm from South Africa, as you said. And I've been pretty much traveling consistently for the last 4 years within South Africa and within South and Central America. Um, and set off 2 years ago, and probably 2.5 years ago, on one of my more super vagabondy missions. And where I left and went to South America with very, very little money and just missioned my way up north. And it was quite an experience. And I think that's what I'm going to pull from a lot to chat about today. Yeah, and I've come back to South Africa now because of COVID. I managed to get back, and it's actually been such a blessing because I'm exploring my own country now and kind of like tapping into the travel spirit, but within my own country, which is really special.
I feel
Yeah,
that. Yeah, it's
yeah,
fun to be a tourist where you live or a traveler where you live and appreciate everything it has.
exactly.
And as you know, I lived almost a year in South Africa, and I love
Yeah,
the country and still intend to go back as soon as I can. So there's so much to explore.
there's so much.
What, what adventures have you been getting up to since you've been back?
Since I've been back, I've sort of come back to the Western Cape like I normally do, which is in the south. And I bought a car, which was a really big deal for me because I've always wanted to be really free of like, yeah, buying a car was like, okay, this is a commitment to being in this country, but it's also given me the ability to go wherever I want in this country, which is amazing. So I was missioning around the Western Cape for a little bit, and I've come up to the Eastern Cape now, which is more like southeast coast for those people who don't know South Africa so much. And yeah, I haven't done a huge amount, but I have plans, especially for next year. I'd like to go up to the mountains. Yeah,
Exciting. I feel
yeah.
you about the car. I'm actually thinking of buying a car here in Costa Rica, and it's been something I've always resisted. Like, I've never wanted
Hmm,
to own a car, but it does give you so much freedom to go on your own adventures and not rely on anyone or any
exactly.
bus schedule for transport. It's huge.
It's quite a treat. I feel very luxurious. It's like, hey, look,
Mhm.
what is this going on? But it's been lovely, and I'm looking forward to like utilizing it to my best. I think a lot of the reasons I didn't want to before was I felt like that would be tying me to a place. And now I'm like, it's okay, it's just a resource and I can sell it again if I decide to go somewhere. So I'm trying to look at it that way.
Yeah.
So
Do you feel like your years traveling have given you that perspective where you just sort of let go of things more easily and don't feel that possessions necessarily tie you down?
Yeah, I'm learning to do that. I'm definitely learning to do that. I think for a long time I really like try to travel as lightly as possible and like wouldn't pick up anything, and like any extra baggage I would be like, oh, I've got so much stuff, and it would like drive me crazy. And then yeah, having the ability to move with a little bit more stuff after a while is actually really nice. And it doesn't actually stop you. I think I always felt like it would stop me and limit me, and I wouldn't be able to go as far as I wanted to, but it hasn't, doesn't. If you,
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, I noticed when I started to stay longer in places, I would just start to accumulate things. Like people would give me things, I would find things, I would buy secondhand stuff that I needed for the place I was in. And then when I would leave, I would just sell it all or give it all away. And so I developed this sort of process of, okay, it's okay to accumulate because it's
Yeah.
okay to then get rid of it again.
Yeah, that's a good mentality. I'm going to channel that a bit more as well. Especially because I think I seem to have been accumulating fast since I've been back in South Africa. And I don't have a home base, which is quite important for me. But
Mm.
I am accumulating. So my car is a bucky. So it has a big, what is that? A truck, I guess, in English.
Mm-hmm.
So it has a big open back so I can accumulate and it feels really good. Yeah.
Nice. So
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear from you, Skye, about traveling on a budget because you mentioned that you went
Mm,
to South America with like very little money, and
yeah,
it's probably the question that comes up most often for me when I talk about traveling is, well, how did you afford it, or how do you afford it? So
for sure. So how did I do it?
how did you do that?
It was a little
How
bit
did you make it
ridiculous.
happen?
And in retrospect, I think I took a lot of chances and I kind of flew by the seat of my pants and just like trusted, which I think I wouldn't do now as much as I did. But then I was just like, so I left South Africa. I bought a ticket to Brazil and I had a return flight for 4 months later. And I had a 10,000 rand in my bank account. And I think that's like $600,
Hmm.
something like that. That's all I had. And I was like, and I was trying to earn money before I left and I couldn't. And then my departure date was coming and I was like, it's fine, I'm just going to go. And I think I was earning about $150 a month through like basic freelancing. Like my freelancing wasn't very up and running. So I was just like, I didn't have a lot of money at all. But I went and I think I, how did I do it? I volunteered a lot. And I think you have to be comfortable. I think I was so willing to experience as much as I wanted to. I was very willing to be uncomfortable and find comfort in like what could be considered uncomfortable. Um, and I signed up to Workaway, which is
Hmm.
like a godsend. It was amazing, and it was like best investment. It was like 300 rand for the year, and I signed up to it. And I think on that trip, it was almost a 1 year trip. I worked this out the other day. I think I stayed in a hostel like max like 12 times in a
Hmm.
year. And when I wasn't, I just volunteered in places. I couch surfed. I basically minimized my costs because I knew that my highest cost would be accommodation and food. And I like try to cut those out completely. So for the most part, I only spent money on travel between places, so bus tickets and um, a little bit like random accommodation here and there. But that's how I did it, and I was actually very comfortable. I only once ended up in a situation which was a bit sticky, and I was in Colombia, and my clients I was working for didn't pay me because it was Christmas and it didn't happen. And that was the only time where I went, okay, this is a problem. But I still made it work. People are incredibly supportive of you, especially as a traveler, and like people are very, very generous, especially in South America, and just lovely. And I managed to get myself back on my feet. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I've realized how far money can stretch and how comfortable you can be without using a lot. And you can be very comfortable. And even if you have a little bit more and then you travel and stay in hostels, you can still stay in some of the cheapest hostels and have a great experience. And that's what I did this year. More, I spent a lot more money on accommodation, and you can still go so far on so little money. It's just about being aware of how to use it, I think.
Hmm.
Yeah,
And maybe about setting your priorities. So maybe
exactly.
your accommodation isn't a top priority because you want to stay longer
Yeah,
wherever you are. I feel like that's often the trade-off. It's like I can spend this much a night on accommodation and stay for this long, or cut that in half either by couch surfing or
yeah,
doing work gigs or staying in cheaper places and stay 10 times longer. So,
yeah. No, definitely.
about
I
what?
think prioritizing is a big thing. And then sometimes you're exhausted and you're wiped out and you're like, you know what? I want to stay in a nice place and sleep in a bed and not be stressed for a change. And you can enjoy that too. But I think, yeah, it's definitely allowing yourself to find comfort outside of your comfort zone. I think that's one of the best ways to put it.
Mm-hmm.
And embracing a slightly different lifestyle. I have always moved a lot around a lot, so I think I have the slight advantage of being very chilled with camping and sleeping on the ground and living very simply.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what are some of your, like, what's an example of an experience that took you outside your comfort zone that,
Um, I reckon a lot of the workaways that I did, I kind of had this idea that I was actually wait. I think one of the biggest things was not knowing the language. Actually, that was the biggest thing in Brazil because I started in Brazil. And that was a bit of a commitment as well because it was like, okay, I'm going to spend 4 months in Brazil and then I'm going to go through other South American countries where they speak Spanish. But now I need to speak Portuguese. And I had no, but I'd like tried to do something on one of those apps and it doesn't help at all. You arrive and you're like, ew, hola. That's like it. Um, so so that was definitely a big challenge, and but it was incredible to observe how quickly I adapted and learned the language because I had no choice. And I think that was probably the biggest thing to bring me out of my comfort zone, and it threw me a lot, and that was what stressed me, and I was very hard on myself about it because I feel very privileged as an English first language speaker, that I can navigate the world and pretty much be able to speak to most people because they can speak English. And I really didn't like that. I was like, I need to learn the language, and I put a lot of pressure on myself. And I was really upset when I wasn't moving as fast as I could, or I couldn't connect with certain people because I didn't speak the language. But it was incredible because it definitely pushed me to learn it quicker. And it's very again adaptation. I feel like humans are we're designed to adapt so quickly, and you notice that so much when you travel because people go, wow, aren't you thrown off all the time, are you even here? I'm like, yeah, because I have to, I have to find a meal and a sleep and
yes.
you just go and you do it and you can, and it's very cool to observe that in yourself. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
That's one of my favorite things about traveling is like it's taught me how adaptable I can be and just how adaptable humans are in general. And
Yeah.
I think if you stay in your comfort zone all the time, you might think that something like not speaking the language or not having money is this huge insurmountable obstacle. But then if you put yourself in that situation and you have no choice but to figure it out or learn the language, then it's like, well, I guess that's what I'm
Yeah.
doing now.
And you do it, and you're so capable. I think that's what is a good reminder for a lot of people is how capable you are. That if you're so scared to take that jump, and for good reason, but you're like, you can do it. We're designed to do it. You can do it. That's just push yourself and breathe past the few uncomfortable days. There's going to be some really uncomfortable days. They're really
Mm,
uncomfortable, but I think I've really learned to value the comfort that comes after those days of discomfort, and I know it now. So I go into situations, I'm like, oh, this is really but I know in a
mm.
few days it's going to feel lovely or better, or so
And sweeter,
keep reminding
sweeter
yourself of
after the
that.
discomfort.
Yeah, exactly.
And how I was preparing for this chat, I was sort of going back through our first messages because and I realized that we first chatted in 2017. I think you
I
were
know.
just starting out your journey and you were like looking for some direction or insight on freelancing. And
Hmm.
now we're like a few years past that, and I'm curious what your freelancing journey has been like.
It's been interesting. It definitely has. Traveling accelerated it because I needed a source of income, and I wasn't pushing too hard for it, but somehow traveling definitely accelerated it. I When I left South Africa 2.5 years ago and went to Brazil, I sort of saw small things were starting to trickle in. And I've been working as a music journalist for about 5 years, not really being paid for 4 of those years, um, but as you do. But I was incredibly lucky, and this actually coincided with when I like got flat broke in Colombia. I got given a permanent position with the website that I was working at, and I'm now a reviews editor of it and
Nice.
have been for the last 2 years. So that was amazing, and my editor's been incredibly understanding of my very untethered existence. So I'm always just like, sorry, I'm in the jungle. There's an 8-hour time difference. I'll get it to you, and it works. So that was great, but also traveling, especially in Costa Rica, was an incredible networking space. Because a lot of different, when I was living at Punta Mona, which we might talk about, we met at Punta Mona as well. It was a lovely community in the jungle in Costa Rica. Um, I met a lot of people from all over the world, and it's amazing how quickly you can just have a conversation and be like, oh, I do this. And they're like, oh, I need you. And picked up an amazing client. I've only got like 2 consistent clients, but it's incredible how that just keeps me afloat as far as the cash flow needs. So I do a lot of copywriting now, and I'm actually ghostwriting someone's book, which is pretty cool.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's like pretty simple, but it's good. It's a good experience. So things have kind of just evolved organically, which is nice. And I don't think I'm being like as active as a freelancer as I could be. I'm not like on LinkedIn and getting hold of people all the time. I get very exhausted by that.
Mhm.
So I kind of prefer for things to fall into my lap, which is very ambitious. But I have had 2 things fall into my lap, and I'm grateful for them. And
And
it works.
there's a great lesson. There's a great lesson in that because I've, in certain stages of my freelancing career, like really pushed and looked for work and tried to force it, and at other stages just sort of let things come to me. And honestly, I think all of my favorite jobs have found me, and
Yeah,
not the other way around. So it's
it's
like
cool.
I
It's
think
cool
owning
seeing
that,
that correlation.
yeah, and owning that like this is who I am and what I do, so that when you meet people and you have those networking opportunities, you can present yourself in that way, and then
Hmm.
just the right people and clients do find you.
Yeah, no, it's great. Trust for the most part. Try hustle sometimes. But it has been amazing seeing how as the ball starts rolling, it just keeps going. And I'm super grateful for your insight way back when we connected through Casper. I got that too. And it's amazing that we met like years
I
later, and
know.
it's been this
And ran into
continuous
each other
thing.
multiple times in
I
Costa Rica,
know.
which is a thing that happens here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about being a solo female traveler,
Hmm.
what you are and what you've done for quite a few years. And I'd love to know what your experience has been like of being a solo female traveler.
Um, that's a good one. It's been, I think from the outset, I want to say it's like a lot easier than perhaps you think. I think that, or than maybe other people think. A lot of people are very surprised, and I'm sure you get this too, or have, that you're like, oh, but you're alone and you're a woman and you went there and you're in, especially Latin America. I went to Colombia and I loved Colombia. It was my favorite country I've ever been to. So many people were like, what are you doing there? And I was like, I'm just living. It's actually quite easy. You just have to do it. Um, I think, yeah, I think I approach things from just a willingness to learn, to experience new things, and not wanting to wait for others. So I think a big reason that I've done all of this is due to just me wanting to have adventures. And sure, it would have been great to do with other people, but I ended up doing it on my own. And by fluke, I'm a woman. Um, and it it's not something I often really think about, actually. Um, but it's definitely, I think, empowered me hugely, just knowing how it makes you very aware of your capabilities. It makes you aware of how you engage with people. It is challenging often, like especially in Latin America, the like the machismo culture is very like, it's harsh, especially in South America. Central America is not as intense, and I experience that a lot as a blonde woman. In the more northern parts of South America, Ecuador and Colombia, that was challenging. That was the first time that I started being like, I wanted to hide a little bit. I was tired of sticking out. I think that's an awareness that you get. You stick out because you're a woman and you're Western. I'm not even Western. I'm from South Africa, but you know, you look out, you look like that, and there were some very challenging moments of just like of being able learning how to put up barriers and blinkers on, and I never felt unsafe necessarily, but I was so aware of like the disrespect a lot of the time. And I think I got a bit of a thick skin, especially in Colombia. Like the men would hiss in Colombia. I've never experienced that before. They hiss. They stand in the doorways, and they're old men, and they hiss. I can't even remember how they would hiss, but they'd hiss. And I would always be like, "This is the most bizarre thing." And I would go with a male friend, and it would be such a completely different situation. Like walking, I was volunteering at a hostel, and sometimes we'd go into town together. And the one day I noticed it, and I fell back a few paces because I wanted to test it, and they started hissing again. It's like very interesting. But again, like I never felt unsafe, and I think that's a big. I think partly it might come from me growing up in a third world country, and like I understand how third world countries operate, and I actually feel much more comfortable. I went to Europe a couple of years ago, and I was like, I don't know how this works, but I went to South America, and I was like, cool, like this makes sense. Oh, Nate. um, yeah, I was like, cool, I know how this works. Like I kind of know how like the people operate, and I can get the hang of it quite quickly. So I think I just like managed to pick up how the countries worked and like just keep my head down and go through it. I think if I'd known more Spanish, and again, the language barrier is challenging, especially as a woman, because there will be moments where you kind of like people that want to take advantage of you, or just like mess with you a little bit. And my Spanish is good enough to understand things, but it's not necessarily good enough to like snap back a lot of the time. And that was maybe where I always felt I was like, I can hear you talking shit about me.
I think it's like peak level of
queue.
fluency. If you're able to snap back, like you're
Yeah,
definitely, you know the language.
I know I need to get on that level next time I go back. But yeah, as a woman, I think, I don't know. Again, I just don't think about it. I just do.
Mm.
And in retrospect, you kind of, I think you do gain a lot of like power and awareness of self through it, through just going, oh wow, I'm capable. And I did it, and I wasn't even thinking, and I did it, and it's okay.
Mm.
There definitely are situations where you need to be more aware of certain things. I definitely am not super good at anticipating those situations because I have this idea that I can kind of do anything. But I think definitely coming from a third world country, from South Africa, and having that mentality of like how to operate within that space
Yeah,
made a
I'd
big
love for you to
difference.
talk more about that. Like, what are some tools that you feel like you brought with you, having grown up in South Africa, that served you well as you were traveling?
Um, Definitely the money thing. I want to say that I think that, and I noticed this a lot having gone up into Central America and engaged a lot in like more US American culture, and was like blown away. This is a big thing for me in Costa Rica. I was like blown away by the mentality towards money. I was like, I have like $500 and I can do so much with that. But then other people act like it's nothing and you can't really do anything with it. So I think for me, yeah, the money thing, I was very clever with my money, and I really knew how to work it and make it stretch. And I feel like I know the value of it in a slightly different way. We have a very different relationship to it than I think Western, for like first world countries, where like credit is a bigger thing. And so I think that was probably a good tool from here. Also, again, just having grown up in a third world country, which with a lot of social issues, and I'm very aware of that as a white South African, being very aware of these social issues, and so going into other countries and observing things and trying to understand the people a bit better based on like how people at home operate. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then also just like a general third world, I just see it so it's a third world mentality. It's like things operate kind of slow and everyone's pretty chilled, and like the government has the same sort of issues. And I just felt like I understood how it worked there. And I had the comfort, almost I had a very similar comfort that I have in South Africa, because I sort of understood the thought processes there, even though I didn't speak the language, which was a very interesting experience to have. And I can't quite put down why that is, but I feel like I slotted into understanding the mentality out there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think I'm picking up what you're putting down. It makes sense to me too.
Cool. You've also been to South Africa, so that
Yeah.
helps.
And then what about, you mentioned like you sort of got a thicker skin and had to put up boundaries at certain moments. And if you don't have language, if you don't have like fluency in the language to do that, do you feel like there are nonverbal ways that we can put up those boundaries as we're
Yeah,
traveling?
definitely. I think that how would I do this? I walk fast. I
Me too.
walk fast and I like mission and I'm always on a mission and I like to look busy. And that's kind of how I do it and I do it everywhere. And if I feel ever uncomfortable in a situation, I have a way to like stand my ground and move. And I've learned how to do that, particularly in South Africa because it's quite unsafe here. But I did that a lot in South America of just like, and people leave you alone. So I'd kind of like, I wouldn't necessarily put my head down and go, but I'd like focus and move if I was in an area which I didn't feel very comfortable in. I was very good at scowling at people when I knew they were when they were saying stuff. And I would always be like, I would try and like be like, I understand you and just don't mess with me. I have a bit of a face when that comes to that. But yes, I think, um, yeah, I tend to, in situations where I feel threatened or unsafe, I get angry. That's my like mechanism. I don't get afraid. So I think that if I'm just as a person navigating a potentially unsafe situation, I get very like intense. And that is potentially
Yeah, no,
how it
that seems
works.
like a good
Yeah.
strategy.
Yeah, I get quite strong and I put my head down and go, but it is very challenging if you don't speak the language. And just learn how to say no as well. That's the same, and in most languages, just no. With
Yeah.
mujeres fuertes, I'm sure that's one of the bigger things in there, from what I've
That's like
learned.
half of the
Just
work
like
we do is
no.
saying no and
Everyone
shouting
knows what
no.
no means. Yeah,
Completely. And it's a complete sentence.
yeah.
Skye, you're also an herbalist, and you did lots of really cool herbalist things while you were at Punta Mona and while you were in Costa
I
Rica.
did.
And I feel like there must be like an overlap there between traveling and herbalism, and I'd love to hear about your experience with those two things.
Yeah, I've grown up in a very holistic household, and grew up with I think I've taken antibiotics like 3 times in my life, and so I've always had sort of a background in like knowing that herbs are medicine. But when I went to Costa Rica and I ended up at this jungle community called Punta Mona, there's a jungle lab and all these witches, this jungle apothecary, which I kind of came into, and I was like, wow, what is this? And yeah, it was an incredible experience of like learning how to understand plants as medicine and it really, really took my interest. And it was amazing because you can equip yourself for traveling in a way, or just for the lifestyle of moving a lot, through herbs so much of the time. And there's this particular saying that I was taught right at the beginning by someone, which is that any remedy, any remedy that you need should be in walking distance from you. And learning how to tap into each environment you end up in, um, and knowing how it actually can support you. And it's really, really interesting. And you find like common plants all over the place. And it's been a very interesting experience to learn a lot about herbal medicine that's from the Costa Rican jungle and bringing back that knowledge and that interest and inspiration back to South Africa and trying to plug it in here.
Mm.
And I think it comes down to, yeah, it's a different way to understand where you are and your environment and the land that you're exploring. And if you have a little bit of background into it, it can be super fascinating. One of my biggest interests within it was to make medicines for myself, to look after myself, because there's all sorts of issues you have when you're on the road all the time. Stomach things are huge. I managed to heal my gut through like ferments when I was at Punta Moana. I've been there twice. I was there a year and a half ago, and then I came back this year, and I was there for a lot of lockdown. And managed to properly heal my gut from developed in a gluten intolerance from eating ferments. And yeah, just like being able to have medicines on hand. I so often end up in places and I'm like, oh, I'll be fine. I've got all of these bottles in my bag and I can sort myself out. So yeah, I think it's an incredible tool to have on you if you have that kind of a lifestyle, and be able to just tap into things around you and recognize plants and go like, oh, that would be great. Like I forage for mushrooms a lot of the time, and you find so many of the same things in all over the world. You're always like, oh, great. I can sort myself out with that. So I think for me, that was the knowledge that I really appreciated tapping into. Yeah,
Any
and then kind
favorite
of, mhm.
any favorite herbs for that you can find all over the world or that are super useful to have on hand?
I find the artist conch mushroom everywhere. And it's a Ganoderma. It's like, you'll notice it. It's like a brown bracket mushroom with a white underside, and people etch onto it. That's why it's called the artist conch. And it's immune boosting for the most part, and that's what I've always used it for. And I found it in almost every forest anywhere. So
Is that
all
the
over.
same? Is that the same as reishi, or is that something different?
It's the same within the same. It's also reishi is also a Ganoderma, but it's not the same. Yeah. So, and reishi is more adaptogenic. So reishi is very like broad scale, whereas artist conch is a little bit more direct on immune boosting. And I found I was up in the mountains in Chiripo in Costa Rica just before I came back to South Africa, and I traveled for a week through like New York at the height of the pandemic and all these things. I found so much artist conch mushroom there, and I was just making tea the whole time. I was like, I'm going to boost myself. I'm not going to catch this. Didn't get it. So,
So,
yeah. And I found it so much since I've been back in South Africa, and it's kind of all over. So it's a real treat. Yeah.
what's like a good starting point if someone doesn't have that knowledge and wants to start
Within
cultivating?
herbalism,
Hmm.
um, I think the best way to start is I think I wrote something once about your kitchen apothecary and how many medicines you can just find in your kitchen. And how you can start just basically from things that are right in front of you that you don't realize. So you have ginger and lemon and cayenne pepper and cinnamon and turmeric, and you have them all, and those are all amazing. Most of those are like warming, super immune boosting herbs. And yeah, your kitchen apothecary is a really good one to start with. And you can often just like sort yourself out really quickly from the kitchen. Stuff like thyme is incredible if you have flu, or cinnamon's great for stomach issues, and you have them all in your kitchen. So that's a really nice one to figure out what you have on hand that you never realized that you had. And from
I'm
there,
a huge
start
fan of
branching out
kitchen
into
tacos.
what might be growing around you, and what often amazing medicinal plants are actually weeds, and they're super prolific, and you're like, what are these? And there's actually been this incredible medicine growing in your lawn for ages, and you keep pulling it out. So that's the next step. You start in your kitchen, then you go into your yard. I think that's a good way to start.
I love it. Like start as close to your living space
Yeah,
as you can, and then like start expanding out from there.
exactly. Yeah. And you'd be
And
surprised. You'd be very surprised by what you can sort out from the comfort of your home.
so I think we're about out of time. And so in closing, do you have any advice for women or really any people who want to travel solo and don't know where to start or have some fears stopping them?
Um, this is it's gonna sound very like cliche, but just go. Just book the ticket and make some kind of a commitment. I think what holds us back so often is like the fear of it, and we don't want to commit at all. And how I committed a lot of the time is I would make a financial commitment. And for me, that's really big because of how I operate with money, and I've always traveled with very little money. So booking the flight and knowing it's non-refundable is always a big deal for me. So I'd book the flight and I'd be like, cool, I have no choice now. There's a ticking clock, and then I'm getting on the plane, and then I have to deal with things when I get on the ground. So I think that is make that first commitment. And there's also a beautiful poem that someone once told that I don't know, I grew up with it. And it talks about how once you are committed to something, everything moves to support you and you'll see it. And
Mhm.
because you've made a decision and you want to do it, and things will happen. It just is kind of inevitable. I think that's just how this world works. Um, so making that commitment, and whether that's you booking a flight or whether that's you booking time off work, and like making sure you can't go back on it, I think is quite important because it's just a bit of a push. Because I think that's what we often all need. We need a bit of a push. So
And I,
try make a commitment, and you'll see. I feel like you'll see that things will start to align. And I know that sounds a little bit spiritual, but it's actually just like fact.
it's so true. It is completely how it happens. And I feel like a theme I'm hearing come up as you speak, it has a lot to do with action. Like, not just make
Yeah,
a commitment in your thoughts, but like take that first step and buy the
we
plane
do
ticket
it.
or go to
Hmm.
the place. And it sounds like everything for you just sort of follows the action of doing it.
Yeah.
And and that's super
That's the
inspiring.
taking, that's taking the leap. It's just going, okay, cool, let me do it. And I think a lot of that comes from, I'm a very like, I think out things really well, but when it comes to actually pushing to do it, like you can plan for months and cool, that's great, but you're not actually going anywhere. So you have to push through at least one thing. That's how I get myself to operate. I just push very hard, and it's, yeah, action. Take the action, take the step, step out the door, walk, open the gate, walked out the path, onto the path, like Bilbo. Let's do it.
Mm.
Can't turn around. And it's an incredible experience, and you probably won't regret it. You won't regret it because even if it's an you have unfortunate experiences, you'd never have had them otherwise, and you would have learned incredible lessons from them anyway. So yeah,
Definitely.
yeah,
Skye, thank you so much for being my
cool.
first guest on Women Who Vagabond. It was so fun.
Thanks so much for
Um,
having me. I've never done a live before. It was a bit nerve-wracking, but I'm
I
excited.
couldn't tell.
Oh, thanks so much,
And
Toby.
and for those watching, this is going to be something happening every Monday at a different time, depending on the time zone of the people coming on to talk. But Women Who Vagabond, it's going to be happening for the next few months at least. So be sure to tune back in. Cool. Skye, thank
Thank
you
you.
so much.
Thank you.
Talk to you
Bye. Have an
soon.
amazing day.
Bye.
Cheers.